Hello and welcome to the Law Deals podcast, where we discuss law firm succession plans, profitable law partnerships, and law firm purchases and sales. I'm your host, Ed Alexander. I've practiced transactional business law for 30 years, have my own practice, Alexander Business Law, and am a principal with Fitzgibbon Alexander, a business intermediary firm. We're on a mission to make sales of law firms commonplace so you can enjoy your practice and your life. Hello and welcome to the Law Deals podcast. In today's episode, we're talking with Victoria Collier, an attorney and a lawyer consultant and coach in Georgia. Victoria is a highly accomplished professional who founded the elder disability law firm of Victoria L. Collier, PC, in 2003. She achieved a consistent gross revenue in excess of $1.5 million for 5 consecutive years before selling her firm in 2020. And that's part of the reason why we wanted to talk to her. The other reason is that since 2008, Victoria has been a trusted consultant providing valuable guidance to law firm owners on developing specific practice areas within their existing firms to enhance overall value. As the founder and CEO of Quid Pro Quo, it is her mission to teach others the art and science to creating turnkey law offices, positioning to transition, and selling for profit. Victoria holds certifications in exit planning and in business valuation. So welcome to the podcast, Victoria.
Thanks, Ed. It's great to be here with you.
Give us a little bit of an introduction. We got the professional details. Give us a little bit of an introduction to you personally.
Sure. So I created my own law firm right out of law school in 2002 and started off with a partner because, there's 6-month gap between when you graduate, when you get your bar results. And so I enrolled a partner who was doing family law and he absolutely hated it. And I said, well, come on, let's do some elder law. Let's get some hugs and cookies from some clients. And so he loved that. But what he didn't do is he didn't love billing clients or getting in clients or anything like that. So after a year, he retired and I continued with the firm that you just mentioned. So I built it up. I had been a paralegal before a lawyer. And so I really was comfortable with paralegals. And so I really built my practice with legal assistants and paralegals. I tried over the years to hire associates. I wasn't really good at it. And really what I realized, Ed, was that I wasn't at the time a great manager. And since then, I've learned, and what I talk about and what I help others with a lot is actually knowing the difference between a manager and a leader. And it's where I find at the end of the career that great leaders can sell their firms for a lot more than people who have either tried to be managers or hate being managers and are solo practitioners.
Excellent. So let's step back there. So you built the firm with legal assistants and paralegals, primarily because you knew that world, right, as coming out of that?
Right.
So in that practice area that you had, right, obviously the lawyer end of it, right, so the providing the legal advice to client was then left on you for the most part. So give us an idea of how you structured the workload and how ultimately you were able to make that so profitable and have such a significant revenue out of the firm for a one lawyer firm.
So in the beginning, the first 5 years, I had made the decision before I had children that I was going to invest everything I had into the firm. And so that included all of my revenue as well as my time. And so the first 5 years is not what I would recommend anybody emulate, but I literally got 4 hours of sleep per night. And I was otherwise spending an hour showering and eating, and the rest was working and building my brand and my practice. And so the first person I hired was a receptionist who could answer my phone, schedule my appointments, and then send out letters to confirm appointments, close my files, the administrative tasks that seemed so simple. And today we automate all of that. But in 2002, that wasn't automated.
Not at all. Not at all. Yes.
Yeah.
And the beauty of that, obviously, is that you're offloading what in today's dollars would be a $15 or $20 hour work so that you could focus on the legal work. So you hire the receptionist. Usually the first hire for most people is their worst hire because they don't have any idea how to do it. So tell me, how did that work out and how did you get the person up to speed?
I had a lot of first worst hires. She was one of them. She was sweet, and she was the daughter of a professional that I worked with in my senior network, and she was a high school graduate. I didn't realize when I hired her she was pregnant, which is okay. I don't want to say anything against HR here, but to give you an idea as to the kind of person, she had her child in a big lumber store in the bathroom and still says she didn't realize she was pregnant when she had the child. And so that's, ultimately didn't go well. I was trying to, all the time edit just basic letters and things like that. And she had been a teacher's professional pro, what parapro they call. And so I cried when I fired her, like literally in front of her to her, because I liked her. She was sweet, but she just wasn't what I needed in my firm anymore. And now she had a baby. And so I felt really bad about it. But yeah, that was the first of many lessons as a business owner, as you're trying to build a practice.
So the lesson that I would suggest the audience take away from that is that what's most important is the firm, right? And so even if you like someone and they're really a good person, if they can't perform the role, that at the end of the day, you can't have them in the firm because that's going to harm everything. And then when you have multiple people, if you keep one person on who's not performing, then that's going to affect everybody else in the firm as well. So
it's like a cancer or a poison that just goes throughout. Absolutely.
And you can always let that person down easy, right? Yeah. And I'm sure you did. You give them a notice, and pay some extra amount of money on the way out the door and
always
all of those things. And, it's obviously a difficult thing to do, but it's something that as a firm owner, you have to be able to do that. That is a basic skill set right there.
You do. And, you hear all the time, hire slow, fire fast. And I can't say that I align with that completely. I do believe in hiring slow, but I don't believe in firing fast necessarily, depending on what the reason is. I, as a professional at least, want to make sure that I have done everything I could possibly do to make sure that this person was successful within their role, within the job, within the business. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's my responsibility if I didn't communicate clearly enough, if I didn't train nearly enough, if I didn't mentor. But once I knew that I had done all of that, then you fire fast at that point when it's not changing. But that can be 3 months, 6 months, depending on what the issue is that you're trying to resolve.
So there's a book that I absolutely love called Crucial Conversations. You may have heard of this book. And one of the statements in the book is that there has to be a reason for hope, right? And so the way I interpret what you're talking about is that if you look and you say, well, what can I do to increase the likelihood of this being successful? And I have done all those things. There is no reason for hope any longer, and it's time to move it on. From a general standpoint of hiring anybody, terminating anybody, what that really means is at the end of the day, evaluating whether or not there's a reason to hope that this person will get better. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. So, all right. So you hire this person, you terminate them, you go on to your next one. At some point in this process, you must have begun to write out systems for each of the positions in your firm. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, one would think. I'm a visionary, and processes and systems, I 100% believe in them. I respect them. I was in the military. I certainly can follow them, but I cannot create them. It's like I'd rather slit my wrists. And so, no, I didn't until I was already in my practice 10 years or more. And what I realized at this point, I was the national expert on veterans benefits, and I was training lawyers on how to add that to their estate planning and elder law practices. And so I created 2 and 3 day conferences. I had sample letters. I had templates of everything to be able to give to others, which we had in our office, but nothing was really, I would say, beautifully systematized. We had our templates and stuff. And it wasn't until I was joining with another lawyer in a business that we were creating together that he was extremely systematized on the Medicaid side. And that's why I joined with him. But ultimately, in my own mind, was I need to connect with someone who can systematize the VA side. It was at that point that my entire office switched into systematizing everything from the front end intake, sales intake, production, and even post-production. So I was well into, that was 2011, and I started my firm in 2002. So yeah.
Quite some time, yeah. So what do you see as the firm gets systematized or process-oriented or workflow-oriented, whatever term you want to use these days? How does your life change when that happens?
Dramatically, because then I could spend less time reviewing people's work. So instead of spending 45 minutes reviewing an entire drafted estate plan, I cut that down to 15 minutes because I knew exactly what I was looking for. We had a checklist of the specific spots within the documents, for example. I could train others on how to do sales. When I sold my law firm, I had non-attorneys doing the sales of our legal services. And so essentially I could train and cross-train. So we had at least two people who knew every function in the firm. And I was at that point just the CEO, as if it's nothing. But I was focusing on the numbers. I was focusing on the customer service and just making sure everything was working the way it should be working. And so that everybody else could enjoy their jobs. And when I say enjoy their jobs, I really mean it, because when you put that kind of support behind your people, they do enjoy coming to work because they feel more productive. They feel that they can get a lot more done, and it's satisfying.
They know what is expected of them and they know how to perform it. So yeah, both important factors for satisfaction in a job. You mentioned two things there, and I want to take a step back and look at those. The first is a checklist, right? So one of the things that drives me nuts is when I hear people talk about implementing systems, but they don't really talk about how they're implemented, right? So the checklist is one thing, but I'm sure there was something else besides just a checklist, right? So tell us a little bit about what your typical system would look like and how I, as a new employee coming in, would be indoctrinated into that process.
For sure. So I'm a big believer in having electronic databases, CRMs, work production software, that when you enter someone's contact information, you can enter all the data around it. So who are they? How did they come to you? The referral source. So you can, as a CEO, collect all the data as far as how many leads, how many conversions, and then after the conversion, what are we doing for them? So then that crosses into a different software program, because unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that have lead systems and production systems that are one system. So then we would have that. And then within our document production system, it took the client from the beginning and pushed it all the way through. So it would assign who's next, doing what, and where are we. So we could pull up a report that showed me the funnel, if you will. And so I could easily see where's the clog in the funnel if things are getting stuck, right? And so that's some of the stuff that the people would be able to expect. Also, I think that beyond systems, it's also practices. And so we had daily huddles in the morning, just like the Ritz-Carlton. In fact, I took it from that book. We had daily huddles to talk about what was our win from the day before, what's our focus and goal for today, and what's our gratitude, because gratitude, I think, precedes everything and then produces everything.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's wonderful.
And then we also had weekly meetings of production as well. So even though I didn't have my hands in the files anymore. I didn't know all the customers anymore, all the clients. I felt like I did because we had weekly meetings that my team would come to me. They would lead the meetings, and then they would give the reporting as to what's going on. It was also a beautiful time for training. You hear that a lot from the employees and I felt it when I was a paralegal. I'm kind of thrown in the middle. I don't know why I'm doing this, and I don't know what the end result is. I just know what I'm supposed to do. And that I never get to see my lawyer enough, and I never get to ask enough questions. Well, at the weekly production meetings, not only were they to report to me where everything was, the status, but that was their opportunity to ask me questions. Now, Ed, I never gave answers. My answer was, what do you think the answer is? And where can we find that if we don't know the answer? And that's how you really empower and you mentor your team. And that's how you yourself, as the owner, can remove yourself from all those other roles.
Excellent. Excellent. So at this point, if you're acting as CEO, you have that other attorney. Was this your partner in the business?
So over the years, I had hired a few associates, and then I even upgraded one to partner at one point. So we were partners for a couple years, and I really liked him, and he tried really hard, but he was serving three masters. He had his father, who he needed to prove his worth to. He had his stay-at-home wife who liked to be the trophy wife that, she wanted the money, but she also wanted him to only work 9 to 5. And then he had me as an example that didn't have any of those. It's kind of like, nah. And I don't ever expect anyone to be me, but I expect you to be the best version of you. So at some point, when the complaints started coming in from clients and when I had to start giving refunds of thousands of dollars, and I went to him, and I said, this refund's on you. It's not on me. It's coming out of your check this time instead of mine. He said, can I just take my computer and I'm gone? And I said, you can have it. Go. And to this day, we are still friendly, very friendly with each other. I still love him and respect him very much. So that was my last partner. And then 3 years before I went to sell my practice, I knew I needed even a higher level of really systematization and just formalization of the business side of things. And so I hired a professional legal administrator, a C-suite level office manager, if you will. And so she also was a licensed attorney. She also had experience in estate planning, which is what we did. And so I hired her to get my office in order so that I could sell it. I happened to sell it to her, but that was not necessarily the goal from the beginning.
So let's go one step back. I want to talk a little bit about the sale, but the non-attorney intake that you had. So that's usually a big conundrum for attorneys, is thinking that I've got to be the one to meet with the potential new clients, right? So you implement this. How does it come about? And how did you make sure that, number one, legal advice wasn't being provided, and number two, the client was being taken care of?
Sure. So we had, in my office, we had built it to be this way, was we had a receptionist that did the initial very brief, am I going to get you to my intake specialist or am I going to refer you out to someone else? Okay. So that was a brief call. Mm-hmm. If it went to the intake specialist, then the intake specialist would then have about a 7.5-minute phone call with somebody to determine, to build rapport and determine, can we help them? So asking enough questions as far as, what's your issue? What's your goal? What have you tried already before? Those kind of things. So then that person would actually schedule an appointment with our salesperson. Our salesperson, I actually tried to hire like a traditional salesperson, except that did not work well for me. Instead, I trained my paralegals who really knew the ins and outs of what we did and why we did it and how it helped people, how it benefited them. I actually trained them to do our sales call, our initial consultation, if you will. So it went from intake to the sales paralegals. But how it came about, Ed, you asked, is through my probate work. Probate is cut and dried as far as the law. You have assets in your name with no beneficiaries, or you have assets in your name with named beneficiaries or co-owners. And so all we had to do was ask, simply say, are there any assets, accounts, anything that has this person who died's name on it that doesn't have any co-owners? Yes. Okay. Then that sounds like it would be going through the probate process. This is what we charge for this. And would you like to move forward? It was as simple as that.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
Yeah. And my paralegal did that over the phone. And this is before COVID. And so they were paying, $3,500, $4,500 over the phone. And she says, okay, so during our first meeting, we are going to have the petition drafted for you to review. So what I'm going to do is, after you give me your credit card, I'm going to send you our client questionnaire. You're going to fill everything out. and then we're going to draft the petition based on that. And so then that's how we got it started. And they didn't care if they were talking to me or not. They just wanted their problem solved. And my
Right.
paralegal could convey, we solved that problem. So we would draft the petition. I would look at the client questionnaire. I would look at the petition. Of course, I would not be the drafter. And then when the person came in to look at the petition before we filed it with the court, I would go in and meet with them. I would go over the petition with them. And if everything looked like it was okay, if there was any legal issues we needed to address, I addressed them. But assuming everything was okay, they signed it, I signed it, and then my paralegal and my client would go to the courthouse together and file the papers. So that's how it started. And I thought, what a beautiful world this is. I don't have to be here to make this sale. I only have to be here to, provide
Right.
that legal guidance in the meeting. So then we expanded from there to the other services in our office.
So a couple of points that we want to take away right from this. So the first is that obviously you offloaded everything from the lowest level of capability, right? So your paralegal could handle it. You didn't offload it to a receptionist or something, right? But you didn't handle it either because it didn't take your expertise to handle it, right? And so it's not like you handed off the whole thing. You still reviewed it. You still did ultimately meet with the client, but that client had already been engaged at that point in time. So great, wonderful system. And obviously the paralegal wasn't creating the petition or whatever documents needed to be filed. They were using something that you had reviewed and approved, and that there were specific areas that they needed to complete. Now, you then had your input so that if there was anything out of the ordinary, typically forms and things of that nature are going to deal with 80 or 90% of the cases, but maybe, there's something coming in that's a little bit different. So you put your legal stamp on that. And then you're able to do this on a fixed price basis. So you tell them what the price is up front. They're comfortable because they know that's the check that they're going to write. That's all taken care of before you talk or have word one with any of them. Wonderful system. Great.
Exactly. And it worked with all of our different services to include the ones that we even charged $15,000 for. My paralegals were selling $15,000 services and even better than I would do because I would discount everything, as many lawyers do. You're like, oh, I feel bad for you. I'll discount it. Your paralegals don't feel that way. They're like, man, I get a paycheck in 2 days. I want to make sure that we get this client. So.
Well, the other part is from a lawyer standpoint, right? We go on the everybody knows what we know model, right? Which is, this is really easy for me to do. And so how can I charge that much for it? Well, it isn't really easy, right? It's all that the years of experience that you put in that make it easy for you, and all of the different trials and tribulations and things that come up, and you're planning for all of this, but yet you discount your own expertise in that process. So excellent. Okay. So let's move to the point where you're looking to go ahead and sell your firm.
I wanted to add, if it's okay here, in that wasn't just legal production and sales, but we do a lot of seminars, as you can imagine, with an estate planning firm and things like that. And even my assistant started doing the seminars where I didn't have to go out and do the seminars. And so my estate planning paralegal did the seminars, and I had a social worker on staff. She also did the seminars as well. So even being the front-facing person, where it's like bringing in the clients from the community from the beginning. So many lawyers think, well, I have to be the one out there establishing that relationship to begin with. And I can say that, well, that wasn't the case in our office. My paralegal was doing it. My social worker was doing it. Anyone but me at some point was doing it. So,
and that's actually really interesting too, from a standpoint of the team approach, right? Because a lot of times, even if you are, as a lawyer, doing the consultation with the client, it depends on the matter, right? But if you're doing that, it's very important to introduce the team and make sure that the client understands this is a team approach. Although, I'm the person giving the legal advice, there are other people in the firm. They are more accessible than I am. You should contact them. They will have all the information you need, because most of the information you need is not legal advice. And when it is legal advice, we'll set up a call and we'll do that. So great way to get yourself out of having hundreds and, whatever of email and calls that you have to return and all those things as well. So great point there. Pretty interesting that you were able to get that marketing going there so that it really frees up your time and you have a good life by virtue of that, instead of that workload that you took on when you initially formed the practice, which I agree with you, nobody should do. Okay, let's move on to when you decided to go ahead and sell the practice, right? So you had mentioned earlier you had this view that you were going to sell the practice. When did you start thinking about it from the standpoint of, I want to sell on this date, therefore I need to be thinking about it how far in advance?
Right. So I wish I had, been strategic from the beginning, but what really happened was that I'm a veteran, as you know, and I do veterans benefits, and I was on Veterans Day at an assisted living facility about to do a presentation for veterans on Veterans Day, honoring them. And before I even got on the stage, this woman on the front row started heckling me about why I was there and what I was doing and all this kind of stuff. And my mind did not go where it used to go, which was, these are my people. I used to work in a nursing home. I took hands-on care of elderly people and veterans, but that's not where my mind went. My mind went to, oh my, shut up, lady, to put it kindly. And then I thought to myself, I don't need to be doing this anymore. And it wasn't the speaking that I didn't need to do anymore, because I love doing that. It was, I don't need to be doing this anymore, providing these services, because if this is the first thought that goes through my mind when somebody heckles me, then I'm not serving my people very well anymore. And so that's when I made the decision that I need to make a transition. I didn't know what it looked like at that point. All I knew, Ed, was that I was 48. My kids were 7, 8 years old, and I did not have enough in retirement. My wife was a stay-at-home mother and had been since they were born. And so I was the sole breadwinner, no money saved up, and I needed to get out of my law firm. And so, just closing the doors, like historically, I'm sure that, you've been here longer than me, I think, that just wasn't an option for me, like so many lawyers have done before. So I had to find a way to make value and continue to create value out of my firm, even if I wasn't going to be there.
You spent all that time building this great assets. This is the thing that really drives me nuts, is when the lawyers look at it and go, well, I'm ready to move on. Let me close the doors. I mean, my analogy is, the kids leave for college, so you burn down your house. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, right?
Right. I like that.
But continue on. I interrupted. I apologize.
No, it's all good. So that's when I started looking for an office manager. And so at this point, I was about 1.3 million, and all the different legal assistants and paralegals all had their hands in different roles, that was taking away from their core jobs. And what I should have done prior to that, when I was about 750, I should have hired an actual office manager at that non-C-suite level, the one that handles all your vendors and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't. So I went straight from nothing to a C-suite level, paying well over $100,000. And that was quite a decision. But I knew that she could get my finances in order. I knew she could get my policies and procedures shored up, all of those kinds of things. And so that's what I hired her for intentionally. And I do personality professional assessments. And there's one particular one that I do that is just off the charts accurate. And so the guy's telling me the result, and he says, hey, she's like going to want to take over your firm someday. And he said it like it was a negative thing. And I was like, oh, really? So do you think like 3 months from now or 3 years from now? And he said, that's the thing, is I don't know. And so I trusted that assessment. I hired her. And then I waited until she showed me that, in fact, she did want to take over the firm. And that's when I sprung the opportunity on her, and she accepted.
So how long was that from the time you hired her?
About 1.5 years, maybe 2 years.
Okay, great. So from the time of that heckler to the time that you sold your firm was how long?
It was it was like 2 years. I think it was 2 years, 2 or 3 years.
2 years. So that's relatively quick, right? But the thing to remember there is that you kind of developed your own internal buyer, right? Not intentionally, but you ultimately did, because you hired a person who had the capability to take over the firm.
Correct. So I was heckled in November of 2017. I hired Shannon in April of 2018, and I was out in February of 2020.
Excellent. Good. So now we're selling the firm. It's early 2020. Give us an idea how it worked.
Right. So in November of 2019, Shannon had indicated in a team meeting with everybody that she was going to be a partner, or she's going to go out on her own or do something in some sort of bold way that kind of like threw me aback. And it wasn't a team meeting, it was a retreat. It was a whole 2-day thing. And so after the retreat, I went up to her and I said, hey, I mean, it seems like there's some passion behind there that I haven't seen before. And so I told her that I would be selling the firm, and either to a third party or to her, so she has first opportunity. And so I considered this, Ed, at this point, for me, emotionally, a fire sale. So I knew that I was not going to get as much for it as I wanted. I just needed to get out, and I really needed to get out. And so I gave her an offer. I told her, she obviously knew what all the books were. She was in them all the time. She's the one providing them to me. There was no secrets. I never had any secrets from any of my employees, actually, other than each other's salaries. My books were always open, other than what the salaries were for everybody. So she knew everything. And so I said, this is the opportunity. This is the price I'm willing to do. And therefore, when you take away my salary and all my seller's discretionary earnings, you should be positive by X amount per year. And so we closed within 3 months of that conversation. And she paid me a 6-figure lump sum at closing. She paid me a 6-figure lump sum 30 days later. And then we negotiated a 24-month 5-figure payment. It was the exact same every single month for 24 months.
Oh, great. Okay, wonderful. We would call that seller finance. So you finance the transaction, which is a great option here. Yeah. And so then what was your transition obligation?
So I agreed to 20 hours a week for the first 3 months. And then it went down to 16 hours a week for 3 months. And then it was 8 hours a week for the rest of the time, however that was. And it was for me to show up and be available to help her in any way she needed, primarily with marketing, substantive law, if she had questions, and certainly around anything specific with any clients that they had already taken. But a 2-year transition is way too long, in my opinion, for anybody. And what had happened was, especially when you tie yourself into hours versus as needed, because we also had if I don't show up, I pay her $50,000 at the end of the 2 years. If she doesn't pay me anything or whatever, she pays me the $50,000. So each of us are trying not to pay each other the $50,000 at the end of the season. But at some point, I'm just sitting there saying, I'm here and you're not using me. You're not utilizing all of my experience and skills. And she's like, look, when you're here, I'm in your shadow. I said, I know, I told you didn't need me this long, So we ultimately agreed for a shorter term for me to get out.
So, a really important point there, because I usually tell sellers that there is a 12-month fuse. And after 12 months, the buyer does not want you around. They think they're going to want you around. They want you to be available for 2 or 3 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. But what happens is, this is your baby, and they come in and they make changes to your baby. And so a natural tension arises between you as the seller and the buyer. Now, 100%, they need you at probably the first 6 months, because there's a bunch of client transition things that have to go on in most practices. Yours was a little bit different, but in most practices, that's the case. And then also, answering questions, systems, how do we do this, whatnot. Now, in your case, it was a little bit different because she had been a part of the firm. And so there's really a lot of value to that, because the staff already know her, right? And the clients probably know her or may be aware of her. So it doesn't look like there's a complete transition of the firm. Instead, it is she's taking over. And a lot of times we'll say this is a semi-retirement and then going to an ultimate retirement, that type of thing. But I agree with you 100%. Really, you offer what they want. in terms of the of counsel arrangement, which is really what we end up calling it. But at the end of the day, don't tie any compensation purchase price to it at the back end beyond the 1 year period of time, because it's going to end at the 1 year period of time, one way or the other is really what it amounts to. So excellent. Great point. Okay. So now let's get to what you're doing today. So you've transitioned out. You create Quid Pro Quo. Tell me about Quid Pro Quo. How did you create it? Why did you create it? All of that.
Right. So when I sold my law firm, I bought a farm, and I thought, isn't that convenient? There's only one letter difference between firm and farm. So it was 89 acres. It was 2.5 hours away from my house, which wasn't convenient. But we were growing crops, and we had horses and chickens and stuff. And so I thought that's what we were going to do. And then COVID hit, and I thought, what a beautiful timing. You know, when everybody else is locked inside, we can be out on 89 acres running amok and still enjoying ourselves. Well, shortly thereafter, at some point, a colleague of mine, local estate planning attorney, contacted me. And I happened to actually be at the office, at the law firm at the time when she called. And she said, hey, I'm looking to sell my practice. Would you like to buy it? And I said, well, I appreciate the respect and, you know, it's an honor for you to even ask, but I'm under non-compete, so I cannot buy it because I sold my law practice because nobody knew, right? I mean, I hadn't told anybody. And so we got to talking, and she had already been using a professional to help her sell it. And she had been planning to sell it to an associate, actually. And it was at the 12th hour that the associate pulled back and said, I can't do it. And so that's when she started looking for outside colleagues like myself. And so she said that, you know, within 15 minutes of me asking her some questions, that I had asked her more questions that were meaningful and insightful to her selling her business than the other professional had for the year she'd been working with them. And she said, do you do this? And I said, I can do this. and so I did do this. So I didn't know how to charge. I didn't know anything like that. So I just defaulted to what I was used to charging in the law practice. So I charged a flat fee up front, not knowing what I was getting into necessarily. And fortunately, or I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but in this case, I'll say fortunately, I found a buyer within 2 months. We were under contract, paid all cash up front in over $400,000. And we were closed within like 9 months of my conversation with her and the closing. So I'd say that was a success, and it probably gave me some false confidence going into this profession.
And, you know, it's interesting. I would imagine it was a great practice, because for it to go that quickly usually indicates that there's some value there, that she was a good business person as well as attorney. I'm always shocked by the fact that from an internal sales standpoint, associates are sometimes offered what I consider to be an amazing deal, and then they kind of go off the rails about it. But that's a subject for another podcast.
Yeah. In this case, it was the right thing to do, because there are people who are just grinders, and it's good that he recognized that he was a grinder and he was never going to be the visionary or CEO.
That's a great point, a fantastic point. Okay, so you go from your first wonderful deal, and now you decide, hey, maybe there's something here. So what's the next step?
Well, so what started happening was people did start finding out that I had sold my practice, because I'm known nationwide as the veterans benefits lawyer, and people would call me up and I'm like, hey, I don't have a firm anymore. I'm not doing that. And they're like, oh, well, I want to think about selling in like 5, 10, 15 years from now. Can you coach me on that? And so that's really where the business started, was me providing guidance to others to start positioning their law firms to sell. And so the first couple years was really just coaching. And then I became certified in doing valuations. And so I started doing valuations, and then the word gets out, you know, and so my first couple other clients were actually buying firms, not selling, but buying. And they wanted me to analyze the deal with them and for them and give them guidance. And so I did that. And so then it just picked up from there. And, you know, I have a private Facebook page and that kind of stuff. So the word gets out. I haven't had to, fortunately, do any marketing, and not any paid marketing anyway. And so it's been since February 2021 was that very first call and my first client. And now it's, April of 2024. And we've closed about 15.
Nice.
Yeah. So
very nice. Are you focused primarily on external sales or internal sales? Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing most of the time in your practice.
The majority are external, but we have done some internal. I have a couple right now that we're under contract internally, but for the most part, they're external.
Excellent. Excellent. And then are you focused primarily on estate planning firms, or are you doing a wide variety of firms?
The bulk of our clients are estate planning, and I think that's just from my networking from 20 years in that business. But we have a pretty large contingent in immigration as well. We have also done a few PI and some family law as well. And I did creditors' rights. That was one of my early ones as well, was creditor rights. So I would say that we do touch on others, but I'm heavily weighted in the estate planning area.
Excellent. Excellent. So if our audience wants to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
The best way is to start with our website at quidproquolaw.com. If they want to know if they like you, right? And so to see if they like me, I've got a podcast as well. And so that's Smart Lawyers Position and Transition.
Excellent. Excellent. Wonderful. And I listened to the podcast and
You've been on the podcast,
yes. Guest, so I appreciate that. Yes. Thank you. Good. All right, Victoria. Well, any final words to our audience?
I would say, Ed, as you probably have experienced, that working with lawyers, because that's all I do. I think that's all you do is work with lawyers. Is that lawyers think lawyers can do all, and lawyers maybe can do all, but they shouldn't do all. And so I would say that when you're starting to think about what that sunset looks like for you, start surrounding yourself with the appropriate advisors. And for example, that's why I had you on my podcast, is because I don't do what you do exactly. And I often need to refer clients to you as the lawyer to help them put the paperwork together. So find the right advisors and don't go cheap on this, because when you go cheap on this, then you're actually losing lots of money that could be spent on your next business or on your grandkids or on your retirement. And so that's what I would leave your listeners with is, now's not the time to do it yourself.
Absolutely. 100%. That's fantastic advice. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your referrals. I have appreciated those as well and look forward to continue working with you in the future.